The bathroom light was still on when the front door clicked shut, soft, ordinary, almost polite, and yet it would become the last normal sound anyone could agree on. Emma Parker was 28, visibly pregnant, and trying hard to believe in fresh starts. Friends said she glowed, the way people do when a long winter finally breaks. But the glow came with tight smiles and careful pauses, those split seconds where she seemed to weigh every word before letting it out. Her husband, Daniel Parker, looked like the kind of man who had learned how to appear steady. He was a nurse manager at a busy hospital, crisp scrubs, calm voice, the person coworkers trusted in emergencies. He spoke about routines the way other people spoke about faith, morning coffee, evening jogs, early nights. After his affair came to light months earlier, Daniel's routines became his apology, proof, he said, that he was changing. He brought flowers without being asked. He offered to cook dinner. He deleted apps, gave passwords, promised transparency. He talked about the baby in gentle, forward-looking sentences, as if naming the future could make it real. Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted the story where a cracked marriage could be repaired with patience and honesty, where the baby arrived like a clean page. She went to appointments. She folded tiny clothes. She tried to forget the way her chest tightened whenever Daniel's phone buzzed and he angled the screen away by instinct. Privately, though, something in her life had begun to feel slippery. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong in small, unsettling ways. She would walk into a room and forget why she was there. She'd lose the thread of a conversation mid-sentence, blinking like a person waking from a nap she didn't remember taking. The fatigue was heavy, deeper than pregnancy tiredness, and it came in waves that made her limbs feel borrowed. One afternoon, she stood at the kitchen counter holding a mug she didn't recall pouring. The tea smelled sharp, medicinal beneath the honey. She set it down, suddenly nauseated, and watched her own hand shake as if it belonged to someone else. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, too quickly. His voice was warm, but his eyes didn't soften. "I'm just foggy," Emma admitted. "Like I can't think straight." Daniel smiled and kissed her forehead. "You're growing a whole human. That's all." But the fog kept coming. And with it, a growing fear Emma couldn't name without sounding paranoid, that the person closest to her might be watching her symptoms the way someone watches a clock. Daniel's job gave him access to medications most people never touched. He spoke the language of dosages and side effects fluently, the way mechanics talk about engines. Emma had always admired that competence. Lately, it felt like a locked drawer she couldn't open. Still, she tried to keep things normal. On the night it happened, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a long day of pretending. Rain had passed earlier, leaving the air cool and damp, the windows faintly misted at the edges. Daniel ate quickly, said he needed his jog, said it would clear his head. Emma nodded, too tired to argue about anything. When he left, she moved through the house in slow motions, turning on a lamp, rinsing a plate, checking her phone without reading what was on it. Her body felt heavy, like gravity had been dialed up. A bath sounded comforting. Safe. Familiar. Something she could control. She ran the water until steam softened the mirror, then stepped in carefully, one hand on her belly, the other braced against the tub. The warmth wrapped around her, and for a moment she thought, maybe this is all it is, pregnancy, stress, a bruised heart trying to heal. But as she leaned back, her eyelids fluttered with sudden exhaustion. The room seemed to tilt, not violently, just enough to make her swallow hard. The air tasted faintly of soap and something else she couldn't place. Somewhere in the house, the clock in the hallway ticked with patient certainty. Outside, Daniel's footsteps were no longer on the porch. And inside the locked calm of the bathroom, Emma's thoughts began to drift, slow, silent, and frighteningly out of reach. When Daniel Parker returned home, he said the house felt too quiet. He would later repeat that sentence in interviews, to officers, to colleagues, to anyone who asked what he remembered most. Too quiet. As if silence itself had warned him something was wrong. He claimed he came in through the front door, set his keys down, and called Emma's name. No answer. He said he noticed the bathroom light under the door, the sound of water still running, and felt a flicker of irritation before concern. Emma took long baths. Everyone knew that. When he opened the door, steam rushed out, thick and warm. Emma was in the tub, her head tilted awkwardly, her body unnaturally still. Daniel said he knew instantly something was wrong. He said he shouted her name, reached for her, slipped on the tile. The emergency call came in just after 9:30 p.m. His voice on the recording was urgent but controlled, the tone of someone used to speaking in crises. He identified himself quickly, explained that his pregnant wife was unresponsive in the bathtub. He followed instructions with precision, too much precision, some would later think, moving her, lowering her to the floor, beginning life-saving efforts until paramedics arrived. When responders entered the house, they found Daniel kneeling beside Emma, his clothes damp, his hands shaking. The bathroom smelled of lavender soap. The tub water had gone lukewarm. Emma was rushed to the hospital where Daniel worked, the familiarity of the halls doing nothing to change the outcome. Doctors tried everything they could, but the damage was irreversible. Emma was gone. The baby was gone with her. The hospital staff moved around Daniel carefully, quietly. He was one of them. A colleague. A manager. Someone they trusted. Grief sat on his shoulders like a visible weight as he stared at the floor, answering questions in short, polite sentences. An accident, everyone said at first. A tragic accident. Pregnant women faint. Baths can be dangerous. These things happen. But as the shock settled, small inconsistencies began to surface. Emma's parents arrived numb with disbelief. They clung to each other in the waiting room, replaying recent conversations in their minds. Emma had sounded tired lately, yes, but also uneasy. She'd mentioned feeling off, like her thoughts were lagging behind her body. She'd joked about pregnancy brain, but her laughter had been thin. One nurse quietly asked if Emma had been prescribed anything new. Daniel answered smoothly, no. Just prenatal vitamins. Nothing else. The medical examiner noted something unusual during routine testing. There was a substance in Emma's system that didn't belong there, one typically used to induce deep relaxation and drowsiness. It wasn't prescribed to Emma. It wasn't recommended during pregnancy. And it wasn't something people accidentally take. When investigators asked Daniel about it, he looked genuinely surprised. Confused. He suggested contamination, lab error, maybe something Emma ate or drank outside the home. But the questions didn't stop. Detectives began to reconstruct the final days of Emma's life. They learned she had experienced multiple episodes of confusion and extreme fatigue in the week before her death. Episodes severe enough that she had stopped driving herself places. Severe enough that she had nearly missed an appointment because she forgot what day it was. Those symptoms lined up with the substance found in her system. When asked again, Daniel acknowledged that his position gave him access to such medications, but emphasized that many people did. Hospitals were full of them. That didn't mean anything. Then came the jog. Daniel said he had been out running for nearly an hour. Investigators checked the weather, the time, nearby cameras. No one remembered seeing him. No devices confirmed the distance he claimed to have covered. Meanwhile, phone records painted a different picture of his private life. The affair he had sworn was over was not over at all. Messages showed continued contact with the other woman, late-night texts, carefully worded calls, promises of a future that didn't include Emma or the baby. Daniel had been living two lives, the remorseful husband at home, and the unburdened man planning an escape elsewhere. And suddenly, the idea of an accident began to look less like chance, and more like design. As Emma's family prepared for a funeral they never imagined attending, investigators leaned closer to the quiet spaces between Daniel's words, listening not just to what he said, but to what he carefully avoided saying at all. As the days passed, grief gave way to scrutiny. Detectives returned to the Parker home, this time with slower steps and sharper eyes. They photographed the bathroom from every angle, the tub, the drain, the half-used bottle of soap on the ledge. Nothing looked disturbed. Too undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no spilled bottles, no slipped towels. If Emma had lost consciousness suddenly, she would have gone under quietly. That detail unsettled everyone who heard it. The toxicology report grew more troubling with each revision. The sedative in Emma's system was present at a level high enough to cause extreme drowsiness, confusion, and loss of muscle control. It was not a single exposure. Specialists concluded it had been introduced into her body on more than one occasion over several days. Someone had been dosing her. The question shifted from what happened to who had the opportunity. Daniel's work records showed he had unsupervised access to medication storage areas. He knew how to calculate dosages. He knew how long the substance stayed active in the body. He knew how it would interact with warm water. When confronted with this, Daniel remained composed. He expressed disbelief, sadness, even outrage. He said someone must be framing him, that the accusations were cruel and unthinkable. He reminded investigators, again, that he loved his wife, that he was excited about the baby, that he had made mistakes but was trying to fix them. But digital evidence told a colder story. A search of Daniel's computer revealed late-night browsing sessions in the weeks before Emma's death. He had searched for terms related to sedatives, detection times, and accidents involving bathtubs. He had read articles about drownings described as unavoidable and tragic. He had visited forums discussing how certain substances could mimic natural exhaustion. When asked about the searches, Daniel said they were for work. Research. Curiosity. Stress. Then investigators interviewed the other woman. She admitted the affair had never truly ended. Daniel had contacted her repeatedly, often after Emma had gone to bed. He complained about feeling trapped. About pressure. About responsibility. He spoke about the baby not as a joy, but as an anchor. According to her, Daniel had promised that everything would be different soon. That sentence echoed loudly in the case file. Emma's family struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the picture forming in front of them. They replayed holidays, dinners, quiet conversations. They remembered Daniel's steady handshake, his polite concern. Nothing about him had felt dangerous. But danger, investigators knew, does not always announce itself. It often hides behind patience. The timeline tightened. On the afternoon of Emma's death, phone records showed Daniel had been home longer than he initially claimed. He had time. Opportunity. Privacy. Enough to prepare something invisible. The bath was no longer viewed as comfort, it was context. Prosecutors began shaping their theory. Daniel had not caused a sudden act of violence. He had engineered a situation. He had created conditions where harm could occur without a struggle, without witnesses, without obvious force. An accident by design. When charges were finally filed, the courtroom filled with quiet disbelief. Daniel Parker, nurse manager, husband, expectant father, now stood accused of causing the death of his wife and unborn child. Emma's parents sat behind the prosecution, hands clasped tightly together. In front of them was a photograph of their daughter, smiling, alive, trusting. The trial ahead would ask a terrible question. How much intent does it take to let someone you claim to love slip beneath the surface and never come back up? The courtroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Daniel sat at the defense table in a dark suit, hands folded, posture careful. He looked smaller there, stripped of hospital authority and home routines. To strangers, he appeared like a man already punished by loss. To Emma's family, he looked like a stranger wearing a familiar face. The prosecution opened with a simple statement: this was not a sudden tragedy. It was a quiet plan. They walked the jury through Emma's final weeks, her confusion, her exhaustion, her growing dependence. Friends testified that Emma had seemed embarrassed by how forgetful she had become. She apologized often, even when she had done nothing wrong. She trusted Daniel to explain what was happening to her body. Medical experts explained the sedative found in Emma's system. They spoke carefully, clinically, describing how it could dull awareness without causing immediate alarm. How repeated small doses could create compliance without suspicion. How warm water could amplify its effects. The jury listened as if afraid to breathe. Digital analysts followed. Screens lit up with search histories and timelines. Late nights. Specific phrases. Accidental scenarios. The prosecution did not claim rage or panic. They described patience. Planning. Waiting for the right moment when everything would look ordinary. Then came the mistress. She took the stand reluctantly, eyes downcast, voice tight. She admitted to the ongoing relationship. She admitted Daniel had lied, to Emma, to her, to himself. She told the jury about his complaints, his frustration, his longing for a future without responsibility. When asked if Daniel ever spoke about Emma's death in advance, she said no. But when asked if he spoke about wanting his life back, she said yes. The defense argued coincidence. They said Emma's pregnancy explained her symptoms. They questioned the reliability of digital searches. They suggested workplace access did not equal misuse. They reminded the jury that no one saw Daniel administer anything. No one could say exactly when or how the substance entered Emma's body. Daniel took the stand in his own defense. He spoke softly about regret. About loving Emma. About trying to change. He cried when he described finding her in the bathtub, his voice breaking at practiced points. He said the affair was a mistake, not a motive. He said the idea that he would harm his wife was unimaginable. Cross-examination was less gentle. Prosecutors pressed him on timelines. On lies. On why he minimized contact with the other woman until confronted with records. On why his jog had no witnesses. On why his explanations shifted slightly each time they were repeated. They asked him one final question: if Emma was feeling unwell, why did he leave her alone that night? Daniel paused too long. The jury deliberated for days. When the verdict came back guilty, Emma's mother closed her eyes and exhaled for the first time in months. Daniel stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. But the case did not end there. Appeals followed. Arguments about procedure. About expert testimony. About whether intent had been proven beyond doubt. The conviction was overturned. Then reinstated. Then challenged again. Years passed. Emma's family learned how heavy justice could be, not because it was absent, but because it was slow. Each new hearing reopened the same wound. Each delay forced them to relive the same final night, over and over, while Daniel waited, patient once more. The facade had cracked, but it refused to fully fall. Not yet. Time stretched the case into something unrecognizable. By the second trial, years had passed since Emma's death, but the facts remained unchanged. What had shifted was the exhaustion. Emma's parents walked into the courthouse with slower steps, older faces, and a practiced stillness. Grief had long since settled into their bones, but anger remained sharp. The prosecution refined its approach. This time, they focused less on emotion and more on inevitability. They argued that Daniel did not need to push, strike, or restrain. All he had to do was wait. Expert witnesses explained how repeated exposure to the sedative would make Emma increasingly dependent, less alert, more trusting of routine. How a bath, something she had done countless times, could become dangerous under the right conditions. How the absence of chaos did not mean the absence of intent. The defense leaned hard on doubt. They highlighted the lack of direct evidence. No video. No eyewitness. No single moment anyone could point to and say, "This is when it happened." They framed Daniel as a flawed man who made terrible personal choices but did not commit a crime. Daniel again took the stand. This time, his composure cracked more easily. Under questioning, his answers grew defensive. He contradicted earlier statements about timing and phone use. When confronted with messages to the other woman sent just hours before Emma's death, he struggled to explain why someone supposedly rebuilding his marriage was still planning another life. The courtroom felt the shift. Jurors listened differently now. They no longer searched for a dramatic act. They listened for patterns. For control. For opportunity repeated until it became certainty. When the verdict was read the second time, guilty, the sound in the room was not gasps or cries, but silence. Heavy. Final. Daniel was sentenced, yet the appeals did not stop. Legal arguments continued to climb through higher courts. Years passed again. Some convictions were questioned. Technicalities were debated. Each delay reopened headlines, reopening wounds for a family that never had the luxury of moving on. Emma's parents attended every proceeding. They refused to let her name fade into footnotes. They spoke to reporters only when necessary, always careful, always composed. They said the same thing every time: this was about accountability. Eventually, the final appeal was denied. The conviction stood. There was no celebration. No relief that felt complete. Justice, when delayed, does not arrive with comfort, it arrives with quiet confirmation. Daniel was led away without looking back. Emma's photograph remained on the courtroom bench long after everyone else had left. Outside, the world continued as it always does. People hurried to work. Couples argued over groceries. Pregnant women walked carefully through parking lots, one hand protectively on their stomachs. But for those who knew the truth, the case left a permanent mark. It proved that harm does not always come loudly. Sometimes, it arrives disguised as routine, patience, and trust, waiting for the moment when no one is watching closely enough to stop it. In the years after the final ruling, Emma Parker's name stopped appearing in headlines, but it never stopped being spoken at home. Her parents kept her memory alive in ordinary ways. A framed photo on the mantel. A birthday candle lit quietly each year. A small box of baby items that never found their purpose, opened only when the house was empty and the grief felt manageable enough to face. They often thought about trust, how easily it is given, how rarely it is questioned. Emma had trusted the person closest to her, the one who shared her bed, her future, her child. She trusted that love meant protection. That routine meant safety. That reconciliation meant honesty. Daniel's double life unraveled completely once the case ended. The image he had curated so carefully, competent professional, devoted husband, collapsed under the weight of evidence he could no longer explain away. The patience that once made him appear calm was now recognized for what it had been all along: calculation. There was no moment where the truth arrived suddenly. No single act anyone could point to and say, "This is when it all changed." That was the hardest part to accept. Emma did not disappear in an explosion of violence or a flash of anger. She faded quietly, weakened over time, guided toward a situation that looked harmless until it wasn't. The danger wore the mask of normal life. Her case became a warning whispered among investigators and families alike. That harm can be subtle. That control can be invisible. That not all threats raise their voices. Sometimes, they speak softly. Emma had been preparing to become a mother. She had imagined first steps, first words, a future that required faith in tomorrow. That future was taken not by chance, but by betrayal wrapped in familiarity. And that is what lingers most. Not the courtroom arguments. Not the appeals. Not even the sentence. What remains is the quiet truth that the most dangerous deceptions are the ones that live beside us, smiling, promising change, waiting patiently for trust to do the work for them.